In 1944, the unthinkable happened in the Pacific. A single U.S. submarine, considered a ghost beneath the waves, did the impossible. It hunted down and sank 5 of Japan's deadliest destroyers in just 4 days. This is the story of Commander Samuel D. and the USS Harter, the destroyer killer. World War II's naval battles were defined by a stark and deadly hierarchy, with the submarine quietly lurking at the top of the food chain, unseen and capable of striking fear into the hearts of enemy fleets. But when it came to the submarine's deadliest adversary, one ship stood above the rest. The destroyer, the unspoken, ironclad rule of submarine warfare was simple: do not engage a destroyer. Submarines, those silent predators of the deep, were built to attack the slow-moving, vulnerable cargo ships and tankers that were the backbone of an enemy's war machine. Their job was to strike quickly, silently, and vanish before the enemy could respond. But against the destroyer, that same stealthy approach was futile. Destroyers were the true hunters of the sea. Fast, powerful, and equipped with the latest sonar technology, these vessels were specifically designed to hunt and destroy submarines. A destroyer could race at speeds upwards of 35 knots, far faster than a submerged submarine could move on battery power, which rarely allowed speeds greater than 9 knots. The Akazuchi, a Japanese destroyer, was a perfect example. Built for one purpose, to track and destroy submarines, it was equipped with depth charges that could cripple or sink any sub in its range. With its advanced sonar systems, a destroyer could locate a submerged submarine long before it ever had a chance to strike. If a submarine was discovered by a destroyer, the standard reaction was clear: dive deeper, reduce all noise, and hope to avoid detection. The destroyer, in turn, would employ aggressive tactics, using sonar to track the sub and depth charges to drive it out of hiding or destroy it outright. The odds of surviving such an encounter were incredibly low. By the spring of 1944, this rule had been reinforced by grim experience. Between December 1941 and April 1944, Japanese destroyers had successfully sunk 14 American submarines. In that time, not a single Japanese destroyer had been sunk by an American submarine during an active confrontation. The kill ratio was telling. The math was simple. The destroyer, with its speed, sonar, and depth charges, was the superior force. For American submariners, the unspoken rule of engagement was to avoid destroyers at all costs. Submarines had to rely on their ability to stay hidden, to wait for the perfect moment to strike, and to escape before their prey could react. The idea of engaging a destroyer directly was suicidal. And yet it was this rule that one man, Commander Samuel D., would soon challenge. In the heart of the Pacific during World War II, where silence and stealth were paramount to survival, there's one commander who refused to play by the rules. His name was Commander Samuel D., quiet, unassuming, yet fiercely determined. There was not a man to shy away from impossible odds. Born in 1907, Samuel D. was the son of a middle-class family, but his path to the U.S. Navy was anything but ordinary. He was a 1930 graduate of the United States Naval Academy, a young officer with a sharp mind and an eye for unconventional tactics. His early years in the Navy were unremarkable, but he quickly caught the attention of those around him with his calm demeanor and sharp tactical insights. It was during his time serving aboard the USS Wahoo, under the command of Captain William Mush Morton, that D's future as a naval legend began to take shape. Morton, one of the most aggressive submarine commanders of the war, was known for his bold and sometimes reckless strategies. He didn't play by the established rules. Morton believed in aggression, surprise, and striking hard when the enemy least expected it. Under Morton's tutelage, they learned the art of submarine warfare in ways that most commanders would have found reckless. Just saw that submarine warfare could be about more than just lurking in the depths. It could also be about taking the fight to the enemy, taking risks, and showing no fear. D's time as Morton's executive officer on the Wahoo shaped his understanding of submarine tactics in ways that would later define his own leadership style. Morton's methods were dangerous, but they were also effective. The Wahoo sank numerous Japanese ships, and Morton's fearless approach to combat became Day's guiding principle. This sense of audacity, learned from Morton, would later influence his decision-making when he found himself commanding his own submarine. The USS Harter. When Dee was given command of the Harter, he was a man transformed. He was no longer the quiet, unassuming officer who had first entered the Navy. Instead, he was now a commander with a reputation for unorthodox tactics and an unshakable belief that the only way to win was to take the fight directly to the enemy. Under his command, the Harter was a vessel of boldness. His leadership style was defined by one core belief: aggression would be the key to victory. Even when it meant risking everything. By the time Dee embarked on his fifth war patrol in 1944, the stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change the course of submarine warfare. The Harter, armed with its crew of skilled sailors, was prepared to face the challenges of the Pacific. But what Dee didn't know at the time was that this mission would force him to test the very limits of what a submarine could achieve and forever. Alter the course of naval warfare. Dee's actions on this patrol would be nothing short of legendary. What seemed like an impossible task to engage and defeat, a destroyer in direct combat, would become the defining moment of his career. And it all started with one simple, daring decision to challenge the unbreakable rule of submarine warfare. The USS Harter was not just another submarine in the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet. It was a vessel marked for greatness. Commissioned in 1940, this Belau-class submarine was an advanced model designed to be fast, stealthy, and deadly. But under the command of Commander Samuel D., it became something more, a symbol of audacity, a harbinger of change in a war where silence was the weapon of choice. The Harter was a sleek, formidable machine, 311 feet long with a top speed of 20 knots on the surface. Equipped with 6 torpedo tubes, it was designed to strike quickly and then vanish beneath the surface. Like all submarines of its class, it was built with the latest sonar and radar systems, though even these sophisticated technologies were limited when it came to detecting fast-moving destroyers. The real power of the Harter, however, was in the hands of the crew, and its commanding officer, Dottie, had earned the respect of his men long before. They set sail on the Harter's fateful fifth war patrol. His leadership was focused, unyielding, and marked by an understanding of the risks involved in their mission. The men who served under him knew that Dee was no ordinary commander. His calm exterior masked a fierce belief that victory came not from running, but from fighting. Even when the odds were overwhelmingly against them. By the time the Harter left port for its fifth war patrol in early April 1944, the crew had already heard the stories. Samuel D. had a reputation, not just for his leadership, but for his ability to inspire men to do what they thought was impossible. And with this mission, he intended to prove that, against all odds, a submarine could take the fight directly to the destroyers. The patrol took the Harter to the waters off Guam, where Japanese supply convoys and their deadly destroyer escorts prowled. The crew's mission was clear: find and destroy enemy ships that were crucial to Japan's war effort. But they weren't prepared for what would come next. What began as a routine patrol quickly turned into an epic test of courage and tactics. On April 13, 1944, the Harter was patrolling near a Japanese convoy when its crew was spotted by a Japanese destroyer, the Akazuchi. Immediately, the destroyer turned and charged straight at them. The situation was catastrophic. Standard procedure dictated that the submarine dive, reduce all noise, and hope the destroyer would pass by. But they didn't follow the rules. His instincts, honed from his time under Morton's mentorship, told him that if they were going to survive, they needed to turn the tables. D's order was simple: flank speed ahead. The Harter surged forward, cutting through the water toward the oncoming destroyer. The crew braced for impact, knowing that this was no ordinary attack. This was a down-the-throat shot, a tactic so reckless that it had barely been theorized, let alone tested. The submarine would fire its torpedoes at point-blank range and then dive beneath the destroyer, hoping to evade destruction by a mere matter of seconds. As the Akazuchi bore down on them, he calmly gave the order, "Make ready the bow tubes." The crew followed his command, knowing that their commander's belief in this tactic was absolute. The Harter's torpedoes were fired at a range of just 900 yards, the closest anyone had dared approach a destroyer. The crew held their breath as the torpedoes struck the Akazuchi amidships. The destroyer exploded in a massive fireball, splitting apart and sinking in less than 5 minutes. The Harter had done the unthinkable against all the odds. They had not only survived the encounter, but triumphed. The destroyer that had once been the ultimate predator of the sea was no more. Surveyed the wreckage and calmly sent a radio report that would become legendary. Expended 4 torpedoes and 1 destroyer. This victory sent a shockwave through the U.S. Navy. The Japanese, too, were stunned. No one had ever dared to attack a destroyer head-on, and the audacity of these actions shattered the myth that destroyers were invincible. But as the victory echoed across the fleet, it also put a target on the Harter's back. The Japanese, humiliated by the loss of the Akazuchi, would stop at nothing to hunt down this bold new enemy for Commander Samuel D. and the crew of the Harter. However, this was just the beginning. The war had entered a new phase, one where a single submarine could turn the tide, and where the unthinkable had already become reality. The battle was far from over. Just hours after the USS Harter's stunning success against the Akazuchi, Commander Samuel D. and his crew were thrust into yet another deadly engagement. This time, the stakes were even higher. The Harter was about to face not 1, but 3 Japanese destroyers, a challenge few could have imagined surviving, on the morning of April 14th, 1944. As the Harter patrolled near the island of Guam, the crew spotted a Japanese convoy escorted by 3 destroyers. The mission was clear: attack the convoy, destroy whatever ships they could, and escape without being detected. But the convoy's destroyer escort was vigilant, and as the submarine got closer, they were spotted. This was no ordinary chase. The 3 destroyers, Mizuki, Hayanami, and Tanakaze, immediately changed course and charged directly toward the Harter. At this point, these options were limited. A quick dive and escape might have saved them, but it would also have meant abandoning the mission. The Harter would have to outrun 3 destroyers that could close the gap at over 35 knots, but he did not run. Instead, he ordered the Harter to turn and engage the enemy head-on, the very thing most submariners feared. He was going to take the fight to the destroyers, just as he had done with the KAZ-UCHI got at a range of just 1,100 yards. The tension was palpable. This calm demeanor betrayed the danger of the situation. As the first destroyer, the Minazuki, closed in, they gave the order, "Fire 1, fire 2." 2 torpedoes shot out of the bow tube, striking the Minazuki and sending it into a violent explosion. The destroyer split apart, sinking within moments, with 1 destroyer down. The remaining 2, now in a panic, sped away, dropping depth charges randomly. The Harter dove deep to avoid the deadly explosions, but the damage was done. One of the deadliest predators of the Pacific had been defeated, not through stealth, but through bravery, audacity. And sheer Wildate's victory not only cemented his reputation as a fearless commander, but it also shattered the notion that destroyers were invincible. For the Japanese, the war just became a whole lot more dangerous. The success of Commander Samuel D. and the USS Harter reverberated across the Pacific, sending shockwaves through both the American and Japanese naval forces. The bold tactics employed by D were unheard of, and the victory over the Akazuchi, and the subsequent destruction of the Minazuki, sent a clear message to the Japanese. The rules of submarine warfare had changed. The immediate reaction from the Japanese was one of disbelief. For years, their destroyers had been the undisputed predators of the Pacific. They were fast, heavily armed, and equipped with sonar and depth charges, specifically designed to hunt down American submarines. The loss of one destroyer was bad enough, but two in a single engagement and by a single American submarine was an unprecedented blow to their strategy. Admiral Toyota, commander of the Japanese combined fleet, was furious. This was not just a minor setback, it was a devastating loss. The Akazuchi had been one of Japan's prized destroyers, and the Minazuki, though not as famous, was still a vital part of the naval defense. The humiliation was compounded by the realization that a single U.S. submarine had not only survived, but had destroyed two of Japan's most essential warships in just a matter of hours. Meanwhile, on the American side, the victory had an electrifying effect. The Harter's radio report expended 4 torpedoes, and 1 destroyer was a concise statement of audacity, a message that would soon be heard across the Pacific Fleet. American submariners, previously confined to a doctrine of avoiding destroyers at all costs, now had a new leader, a new example to follow. Samuel D. had rewritten the rulebook. His success was a beacon of hope and inspiration for the U.S. Navy's submarine forces. But while the American submariners celebrated, the Japanese response was swift. Admiral Toyota, incensed by the losses, immediately reassigned his destroyers from convoy escort duties to a new mission: to hunt down and destroy the submarine responsible for this devastating attack. Within hours, 6 more destroyers were dispatched to join the hunt for the USS Harter. The Japanese were determined to make an example of Day's crew. The Harter, however, had already slipped away. The strategy was simple: disappear and strike again when the moment was right. The submarine had already shown that it could outmaneuver the enemy. And now, with the Japanese Navy in disarray, it was ready to take advantage of the chaos. It had caused what was becoming clear to both sides was that the American submarine force was evolving. The war in the Pacific was no longer just about avoiding danger. It was now about creating opportunities to strike, about using aggression and surprise as weapons as deadly as torpedoes. And at the heart of this revolution in naval tactics was Samuel D., a commander who had shown the world that even the mightiest predators could be hunted and defeated. After the stunning defeat of 2 Japanese destroyers, Commander Samuel D. and the USS Harter continued their high-risk mission, now with an even greater target on their back. The success of their down-the-throat shots had shifted the balance of power, but it also placed them squarely in the sights of the Japanese Navy. Day had made his mark, and the Japanese were no longer underestimating American submarines. By the morning of June 6, 1944. D and his crew found themselves in the middle of a high-stakes game. The Harter had been operating near the heavily guarded Japanese naval base at Toitawi in the Sulu archipelago. The Japanese fleet, including a substantial concentration of destroyers, had been lured there as part of Operation Ago, Japan's attempt to prepare for a decisive battle in the Pacific. This was the nerve center of the Japanese fleet, and it was swarming with destroyers, warships, and planes on constant patrol. On this day, the same day the Allies were storming the beaches of Normandy, Day's submarine was surrounded by danger. A Japanese reconnaissance plane, flying in the dark, spotted the faint feather of the Harter's periscope wake. The alarm was raised. Within an hour, 3 destroyers, Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanakaze, were dispatched with orders to find and destroy the American submarine at all costs. Always calm under pressure, knew this would be one of the most critical moments of the patrol. He watched through the periscope, his eyes narrowing as the 3 destroyers converged on his position. These destroyers were now closing in on him, and there was no time to escape. The Harter was vulnerable, but he wasn't about to back down. The tension was thick in the air as these men braced for impact. The destroyers were cutting through the water at top speed, with their sonar pinging relentlessly. That had no intention of running. Instead, he decided to turn the tables once again. He would use the same bold tactics that had worked before attackers. With the destroyers closing in, swung the Harter's bow toward the Minazuki, the lead destroyer. The range was closing rapidly, and D knew the risks. At less than 750 yards, the Harter was dangerously close. But This was the moment to strike. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, de-ordered. The Harter's torpedoes shot out of their tubes, and seconds later, a massive explosion rocked the Minazuki. Two of the torpedoes had struck the destroyer's starboard side, sending the ship into an inferno. The explosion was so powerful that the crew could feel it through the hull. A shock wave that rattled the entire submarine dot as the Minazuki broke apart and sank. The remaining two destroyers, the Hayanami and Tanakaze, panicked. They turned and fled, dropping depth charges in a frantic attempt to locate the Harter. But they were no longer focused on hunting the submarine. They were now in survival mode, convinced that they had stumbled into a whole pack of American submarines rather than facing a single attacker. However, was far from finished. He knew the Harter could not remain in this area for long. The Japanese would undoubtedly reinforce the hunt. But for now, his victory over the Minazuki had delivered a powerful psychological blow. The reputation of the Harter and its commander was growing. The Japanese destroyers, once the ultimate predators, had now been proven vulnerable. As the crew of the Harter slipped away into the depths, their spirits soared. They had taken on the fiercest enemy on the seas and emerged victorious. But they knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. The hunt was far from over, and the Harter would continue to move through the shadows, striking where least expected, leaving a legacy that would send ripples through the Japanese Navy and change the nature of submarine warfare forever. As the Japanese Navy scrambled to recover from the shock of losing two destroyers to a single U.S. submarine, the stakes in the Pacific were raised even higher. Commander Samuel D. and the USS Harter had proven that the old rules of submarine warfare no longer applied. Their success was not just a tactical victory. It was a blow to Japan's strategic plans and a turning point in the way the Pacific War would unfold. By June 6, 1944. As the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the Japanese were preparing for a decisive battle in the Philippine Sea. This was Operation Ago, a last-ditch effort to lure the American invasion fleet into the heart of Japan's naval power and annihilate it. The Japanese fleet had gathered at Tawi-Tawi, a remote anchorage in the Sulu archipelago, which had become the nerve center of Japan's mobile fleet. The Japanese believed that their fleet, protected by powerful destroyers and aircraft carriers, was safe from the prying eyes of American submarines. They were wrong. The Harter was just miles away, operating undetected, slipping between Japanese patrols like a shadow, charting the fleet's movements and waiting for the right moment to strike again for 9 agonizing days. Submarine remained undetected, maneuvering skillfully between the patrols and keeping its deadly intentions hidden. The Harter was more than a submarine. It was a phantom stalking the Japanese fleet and gathering vital intelligence. The very presence of this single submarine in such a well-guarded area threatened to upend everything Japan had hoped to achieve with Operation Ago. But on the morning of June 6th, Dee's luck ran out. At 3 o'clock, a Japanese patrol plane spotted the faint trail left by the Harter's periscope wake. The alarm was sounded and the hunt was on. Within the hour, the Japanese dispatched 3 of their fastest destroyers, the Minazuki, the Hayanami, and the Tanakaze, all given one simple order: find and destroy the American submarine by 6:47. The destroyers were closing in on the Harter, and the situation was dire. De stood at the periscope, watching as the destroyers zigzagged in search of him, their sonar pings growing louder with each passing second. The attack was inevitable, but they did not flinch. Instead, he did what only he could do. He fought back. He swung the Harter's bow directly at the lead destroyer, the Minazuki. In the face of overwhelming odds, he gave the order: Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. At 750 yards, the Harter unleashed a spread of 3 torpedoes. The lead destroyer, the Minazuki, was caught off guard, its engines unable to change course in time. 2 of the torpedoes struck the destroyer near its forward section. The result was catastrophic. The Minazuki erupted in a massive explosion, sending the destroyer to the bottom of the ocean within minutes. With the Minazuki sunk, the remaining 2 destroyers, The Hayanami and Tanakaze retreated in a panic, dropping depth charges randomly into the sea, unsure of where the Harter was hiding. The had once again outsmarted them, disappearing into the depths as the enemy struggled to regain control. This was no ordinary victory. They had just sunk a third destroyer in less than 24 hours. The Japanese were reeling. Their vaunted anti-submarine defense had been shattered by the audacity of a single submarine and its fearless commander. The impact of this attack would not be fully understood until later. But it had already set in motion a chain of events that would force Admiral Juzaburo Ozawa, commander of Japan's mobile fleet, to make a critical decision. Ozawa realized that if the Harter could strike so deep into their defenses with such ease, his fleet was no longer safe in Tawi-Tawi. The risk of staying in this vulnerable anchorage had become too great. By June 10th, the Japanese fleet was on the move, retreating from Tawi-Tawi in disarray, leaving behind their strategic position in the face of the growing threat. This marked a critical turning point in the Pacific War I, where the momentum shifted in favor of the American submariners, whose bold tactics had begun to cripple Japan's naval might. The loss of 3 destroyers in just a few days was devastating to Japan's war effort. The Harter's audacious strike sent a message that could not be ignored. American submarines were now a force that could strike anywhere, and their hunters had become the hunted. The true impact of the USS Harter's extraordinary war patrol would be felt long after Commander Samuel D. and his crew limped back to port. By June 10, 1944, after sinking 4 destroyers in just 4 days, the Harter had earned a place in naval legend. The psychological toll on the Japanese Navy was immense. Destroyers, once regarded as the ultimate counter to American submarines, were now revealed to be vulnerable, and American submariners were quick to take note. In the immediate aftermath of these actions, Japanese Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa and his staff were forced to make a difficult decision. The fleet that had been positioned at Tawi-Tawi for a final showdown with the Allies was no longer defensible. Their destroyers, their primary line of defense against submarines, were in shambles, having been outsmarted and destroyed. With brutal efficiency, to protect what was left of the fleet, the Japanese Navy had no choice but to pull out, abandoning the strategic location. The departure was rushed, disorganized, and marked by a sense of desperation. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the Harter's success reverberated through the U.S. Navy. Day's tactics, though audacious, had shown the world that even the most dangerous predators of the sea, the Japanese destroyers, could be hunted, and that submarines could no longer be seen nearly as passive threats. The era of silent running and retreat was over. American submarines, inspired by these actions, began to adopt more aggressive tactics. Down-the-throat shots, once considered foolhardy, were now studied and implemented by other submarine commanders, who saw in these boldness a new way of thinking about naval warfare. From June to August 1944, U.S. submarines, emboldened by the success of the Harter, sank an additional 14 Japanese destroyers using variations of these tactics. The predator had become the prey. The Japanese, once confident in their destroyers' ability to protect their fleets, found themselves on the defensive. These daring actions had turned the tide of submarine warfare, irrevocably altering the balance of power. But while these tactical innovations had already changed the course of the war, it came at a personal cost. On August 5, 1944, the Harter embarked on her 6th and final war patrol. She joined a 3-submarine wolf pack with the USS Harter and USS Hake, tasked with patrolling the waters near the Philippines. The patrol began with success sinking several cargo ships, but by August 24th, the Japanese had learned from the earlier attacks and were prepared. The Harter was eventually cornered by Japanese destroyers. In a tragic turn of fate, during a depth charge attack, the Harter suffered catastrophic damage. The hull was breached, and the submarine began to sink. 79 crew members, including Commander Samuel D., were lost. The man who had rewritten the rules of submarine warfare was gone, but his legacy would live on. His innovative approach to submarine warfare would forever change naval tactics. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the U.S. Pacific Submarine Force, called the Harter's Fifth Patrol the single most strategically important submarine operation of the entire Pacific War. The story of Samuel D. and the crew of the USS Harter is not just one of tactical brilliance. It is a testament to the courage, sacrifice, and audacity of those who served beneath the waves. While D's life was cut short, his influence on naval strategy continued to be felt for the rest of the war. His tactics proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one man, one submarine, could alter the course of history. Today, the legacy of the Harter lives on in naval tactics taught at the U.S. Naval Academy, where D's down-the-throat attack is still studied as an example of how innovation, courage, and bold leadership can overcome even the most formidable enemies. As we look back on the legacy of Commander Samuel D. and the USS Harter, it's clear that their audacity and bravery forever altered the course of naval warfare. The story of the Harter is a reminder of the courage it takes to challenge the impossible and rewrite the rules of war. If you found this story as inspiring as we did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to keep these incredible, untold histories alive. The bravery of Samuel D. and his crew deserves to be remembered, and by sharing this story, you help ensure that their sacrifices are never forgotten. We want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are there any other historical heroes whose stories you think deserve to be told? Drop a comment below and join our community of history enthusiasts. Thank you for watching and for helping to preserve the legacy of the USS Harter and the men who made history beneath the waves.